It's time to pause for peace with me, Pastor Jule. Welcome. I'm so glad you're taking a few moments to join me on this podcast today. This podcast is being released to you on Sunday, July 21st, 2024, and you may not be aware that tomorrow is the feast day of Mary Magdalene, known as a saint in several expressions of the Christian household and honored since 2016 on July 22nd as an official feast day recognized by the Pope in 2016 when Mary Magdalene was bestowed a title by the Pope called the Apostle to the Apostles. But this tradition of honoring Mary the Magdalene did not begin in 2016. In fact, what we now know is that there have been expressions of the Christian household that have honored and followed this path and celebrated Mary Magdalene from the earliest days of Christianity. Perhaps her contribution has been lost to us for some time, but thankfully, because of the traditions and places in the world that have continued to look to her, and this amazing discovery in 1896 of her gospel, in which we are told a little bit about her experience of that time when Jesus was dying and rising, and the messages that she was being given as she was there with him. As we read in the canonical New Testament, we read that she was there present with Jesus as he was dying, as he was buried, and as he was rising on what's known as Easter morning. Mary the Magdalene was with him, as far as we know, at every step. In fact, depending on how you read the canonical New Testament, you could even infer that she never left from the moment of his crucifixion to the moment of his resurrection, that she was there holding space, praying for him, journeying with him as he died this horrible death and was brought once again to risen life. So the feast day of Mary Magdalene is a day that is especially celebrated in southern France, where in 1279, the remains of her skull and of other bones of her skeletal system were discovered under this small church in this little place about an hour and a half, 2-hour drive from Marseille and the Mediterranean, and about 25 or so miles from the amazing mountain range that's known as Santa Baume. There in this little town called Saint Maximum la Santa Baume, it was discovered that the skull and other bones of Mary Magdalene were unearthed. And so in order to preserve this amazing crypt where she and a few others were encapsulated in these sarcophagus, in order to preserve this crypt, an incredible basilica was constructed beginning in the late 13th century, and to this day a place where pilgrims gather. And this is the 1 week of the year that her skull escapes that crypt and is a part of a service of Mass right there in that basilica, and many celebrations that take place around this little town of Saint Maximum la Santa Baume. There are processions of her skull throughout the city. There's this way in which people come to honor her and her role. Now, people from around the world come at this woman, Mary Magdalene, in a whole variety of ways. There's been a tradition that actually is based upon faulty biblical interpretation, a rumor, if you will, that was begun by Pope Gregory late in the 6th century, that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. While there's no biblical evidence for this, while there is very little shreds of tradition around this, there still are those who look to her as this repentant prostitute, this woman whose life was changed around by her encounter with Jesus, and then went on to become this amazing holder of space for him as he died and as he was buried and as he rose again. Though that tradition is out there among some because of this rumor begun by the Pope late in the 6th century, what we know from the canonical New Testament and what we know now from the extra Gospels that have been found, these apocryphal works, especially the Gospel of Mary, unearthed in 1896, we know that Mary the Magdalene had a prominent role in the life of Jesus. That she was a teacher, a leader, especially among the women, and that she was, according to the Gospel of Mary, the one who was able to calm and comfort the disciples when they're like losing their minds that their master is being crucified upon a cross and is being torn from them and is telling them to go and do the same kind of work that he had been up to. According to the Gospel of Mary, it is Mary who rises to comfort them, giving a transmission of the energy that is of her heart to them to calm them. Just like any one of us who may be experiencing immense fear or anxiety may be calmed when another person either reaches out and puts a hand upon our arm or even gives us a hug, we can feel that energy and find ourselves grounded once again into who we are and ready to be who we need to be in the steps ahead. This is part of the work of Mary the Magdalene, according to the Gospel of Mary. So, on her feast day in southern France, when that skull is released from the crypt and she is carried around this city and honored and just a mass in this beautiful basilica taking place before her skull, there is a way that the human heart, which is craving for this connection with a sacred feminine presence, is allowed an opportunity to unite with the power of a woman who was faithful in her role. Whether she was a prostitute who repented and changed her life, which in and of itself is problematic when you start to think of why a woman would even be a prostitute and what would make that sinful if, in fact, a woman must prostitute herself in order to be able to survive in a culture that would not allow her to have any other gifts and earn any other income. Why that would be something so horrific on her herself. But if we accept any part of that tradition of Mary the Magdalene being this woman who repents, what we know is she went on to be the one the risen Christ spoke to first. In fact, the tradition of St. Maximum Le Saint-Baume, blessed by the Pope himself, is that there is a little piece of skin that was found when her sarcophagus was opened and these beautiful perfumes came forth from it, this alabaster sarcophagus that was unearthed and opened in 1879. And there was on the skull just this little piece of skin left, which seems preposterous, of course. The claim being that this is the place where the risen Christ touched Mary in the garden. And thus the skin has not deteriorated after all of these years. And so this very holy skin that has been named by the Pope, the Nolimitandria, which is this place where Jesus reminds Mary, don't cling to me, Mary, don't cling. We have no need to cling to anything. And so even that bit of skin is honored, and all of the relics that are attributed to her come back together in southern France and are paraded around the city. But also there's a part of her relics, her reliquary, that is taken up to the grotto of Mary the Magdalene, this massive cave, the tradition being where she lived the last days of her life. This massive cave, this grotto, where Mass is celebrated by the Dominican fathers, who are the guardians of this crypt and who daily celebrate what's called the Holy Office or the Divine Hours, not only in this grotto, this huge, massive cave, but also in their little hostelry, which is right there at the base of the mountain. They're honoring, since the 13th century, the presence of Mary the Magdalene. They're in this place of southern France. Well, if you go back to several of these Pause for Peace recordings, you can find all sorts of stories I've told about Mary the Magdalene. I wanted to be sure that we know, though, on this day about her feast day and an opportunity to celebrate her. Because I believe there is a craving, especially in a lot of women I have spoken to in these last years, to have some physical form that represents the human physical female body that is a part of this story. You know, there are traditions in the Christian household that will not allow women to teach. They actually will trace it back and say there's no canonical biblical evidence that a woman was in a teaching role. And yet it appears they are forgetting to read aspects of the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the fourth Gospel, where we are given this story in Scripture, so clear in the Gospel of John, that Jesus is giving the charge to Mary the Magdalene to go and tell her brothers, to go and tell her sisters about this amazing thing God is doing in this way God has risen Jesus to new life. She's given the message on Easter morning. She's the one with whom the risen Christ entrusts his revelation of resurrection. And so she is the one that goes forth to teach this amazing truth. She's the one that goes to tell. That's what it means for her to be the apostle to the apostles. She is the apostle, the one sent with the good news to the others who will also be sent with the good news. Thus, there is in the heart and soul of so many of us a desire to reclaim the part of the story that honors the female form of being faithful to the path of love, of honoring the call of God in our lives, of being a part of the Christian community as proud contributing members of the Christian community because of the way the Spirit of God continues to work in our lives, even if we are in these physical forms. Mary the Magdalene is somebody that so many of us honor because she herself is a woman. And she herself is able to be a heroine to us, not only to women, but to all. Because regardless of her past, whether she had been in the profession of prostitution out of great desperation, or whether she had been a woman that was prepared in mystery schools all over the ancient world for her work with Jesus the Christ, as there are those who believe Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and others, Mary the Mother, Mary Salome, all had been a part of this training ground for this work that God would do through this community committed to the path of conscious love. Or whether she was somebody who merely encountered Jesus when he stopped in town and started teaching in her brother's home. Whatever it might be, to have this heroine before us in Mary the Magdalene does our heart well. In fact, there are traditions following and honoring the path of Mary the Magdalene, as we have not only learned in the Gospel of Mary, but also as has been the tradition of this monastic community, the desert fathers and mothers who took to Egypt deserts in order to keep alive this way known as hesychism, of returning to the heart and deeply dwelling in the quiet and listening for the ways God will speak to us in the quiet recesses of our heart. Whether we be a part of those traditions or are just beginning to know of Mary the Magdalene, this week is a week when we can feel empowered by the fact that it has always been men and women, children, youth, and adults that have had in their bodies the Spirit of God seeking to guide us into the path of love, using who we are to be about this amazing work of bringing new life to the world. And so I hope you will take time this week to honor the Magdalene. I hope you will find something out about her. Go to Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Start reading at the time when it's talking of the crucifixion, the burial, and the resurrection. Read these sections of the canonical Gospels and see how Mary is there every time the women named first, except for one time in the Gospel of John when Mary the Mother is named before Mary the Magdalene. But every time, otherwise, she is named first among the women. And what we know from even the way the Greek New Testament is given to us is that Mary, the one being called the Magdalene, has a title and a role. There is a specific work she was with Jesus to do. We can give thanks that she was faithful to it. And we can contemplate how we are listening to and being faithful to the work God is calling us to do. For just a few moments now, I want us to take a little time of silence and to go into the quiet spaces of our heart and to listen for what message God might have to us. And if part of what you're hearing internally, maybe in your brain, is turning on and saying, this sounds so weird, or how in the world can this woman be telling me this kind of story? I don't believe it at all. Know that you're in good company. There are many along the way who have said that. And in fact, when Mary gave her testimony that the male disciples asked her to give, according to the Gospel of Mary, the first response is, nah, that's too weird what you're saying. Or, nah, Jesus wouldn't give such a teaching to a girl. You're in good company if you think that. And yet I encourage you to find a gospel, find the Gospel of John, find the Gospel of Matthew, find the Gospel of Mark, find the Gospel of Luke. Read what is there about Mary the Magdalene. See what you can sift through and now begin to integrate into your own life. So let's turn to the quiet resources of our heart. I invite you to just get yourself comfortable for just a few moments. If you were one of those Coptic desert fathers living out in Egypt, a part of that tradition called the Hesychists, where John Cassian himself, who came to the Western world and brought part of these teachings about Mary the Magdalene way back in the early 4th century, bringing those understandings to the shores of France once again, reawakening this understanding of Mary the Magdalene. If you were a part of that tradition, you would be craning your neck, focusing all of your attention right there in the middle of your chest on your heart space. But however you're able to take a position that will allow you to go inward into the quiet spaces of your heart, I invite you to do that right now. Take a deep breath. Just release it slowly. And focus all of your energy, all of your mental space, all of your emotion. Focus it all right there in the middle of your chest. And if you're finding like there's pains in your body pulling you off, you might want to place your hand in the center of your chest and your heart space. This is the spiritual eye of the heart. This is this organ of spiritual perception that every one of us has been given. And so when we awaken the spiritual eye of our heart, we begin to know, we begin to see, we begin to have God, the Spirit of God, communing in us, giving us the wisdom that we need for living each day. We can check that with community. We can check that with scripture. And yet we also have the responsibility of listening. I'm reminded of John Philip Newell's translation of Jesus' great teaching in the Gospel of Matthew, these amazing Beatitudes. And John Philip uses these beautiful words Jesus saying, "Blessed are the clear in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the clear in heart, for they will see God." So as you turn to your heart today, if there's something that needs to be cleared, let go. If there's a pain there, pray in these moments, God, clear my heart. Allow me to see you clearly. I want to know you clearly, O God, Holy One. Sacred presence that never leaves me. I want to experience you and know you clearly. And if anything is pulling you off from focusing on what's taking place in your heart, what's coming forth from your heart, perhaps there is a remembrance, perhaps there's a visual coming, a word, a smell, whatever it might be. These are all ways that the spiritual eye of the heart speaks to us, that God is able to commune with us through the spiritual eye of the heart. So whatever that might be, with that intention that God will clear your heart of any bitterness, of a grudge, of any anger that's pulling you off, of any shame, any heartbreak that has become the home in which you live. Asking God to clear that right now. When those little gremlins kind of rise up, you can use the internal phrase and return again to your heart space with that internal phrase, return to the love that is in you. Return to the love that is in you. To listen. to see, to know. And in the quiet, whoever you've been, whatever you have done, ask God to reveal to you who you are and the role you are here to play in the work of love, in the work of life for all the world. Who are you really? This beloved of the divine. And what role are you here to play in this great work of love, this great work of life for all the world? If you want to pause this podcast and remain in the stillness a little bit longer, I invite you to do so. Whatever's come already likely has been the message that you need. And if you're fidgeting, return to the love that is in you. Pause the podcast. Keep on listening. And then when you're ready, you can return your hands to your lap if they have not been there now. Maybe wiggle your toes to get yourself grounded back here in the earth, because you are a body and you live here on the earth. When you're ready, you can open your eyes and remember that you're looking out at the world through the eyes of love, because the spiritual eye of your heart space has been awakened right now. We pray that it's been cleared a little bit of whatever has been congesting it, and that it's a little bit more ready to take up its role in the life of the world. Thanks so much for being with me today. Thanks so much for listening to and reflecting upon the work, the life of Mary the Magdalene, the way this woman who's been lost to us for so many years is coming back to us, whose story is reemerging, and who is inspiring and can inspire every one of us for the role that we are to play, the love that we have and can emulate to all the world, that immense love of Jesus the Christ. Thanks so much. Have a blessed week.